There's a remarkable story by James Sussman in today's New York Times, and actually yesterday's New York Times, July 24th. It's titled "The Bushman Who Had That Whole Work-Life Thing Figured Out." And this is a story that actually I tell this story. This is not, new research. Although the part about John Maynard Keynes I didn't know, which I'm grateful for, and I'm going to share with you in just a moment. But when I wrote Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight back in 1996, there's a whole chapter in there about ancient cultures, and I tell the story about the Kung, who go by a variety of different names. There are kind of subgroups and sub-tribes and whatnot. But these are the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert. They're also known as the Juhosni, which is another group in the northeastern part of southern Africa's Kalahari. And, as I pointed out in Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, these people work an average of 15 hours a week. To produce all the food and survival needs that they need or want. And the rest of the time, they play with their kids, they make music, they play games with each other, they dance, they sing, they have sex, life is good, right? They eat 15 hours a week. So and this was in Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. In Crash of 2016, I wrote about how Time magazine back in 1967, as I recall, maybe 66, 67, 68. It's in the book anyway. It did a whole story. It was a major story about how productivity had always followed wages from the George Washington administration up until 1968 or 67, whenever they wrote this article for Time magazine. And so as people became more productive, in many cases as a consequence of automation, right? The steam engine, things like that, the internal combustion engine, electricity. As people became more productive, their pay went up to the point where, people working in factories, just making stuff, were able to raise a family, put their kids through school, have a decent retirement, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that was the norm in the 1960s. And so they said, if productivity continues to improve at this 2, 3, 4, 5% rate per year, going forward, by the year 2000, the average person in America will be working 15 hours a week for the exact same pay they're getting right now. In other words, enough to raise a family. Or they'll be working a 40-hour week and they'll be making a pile of money. Now, if Reagan had not changed the tax laws in the 1980s, and the CEOs had continued to only take 30 times what the average worker makes, that would actually be the case right now in the United States. If the billionaire class had never emerged, if they had simply stayed the multimillionaire class, then working people in the United States would be working 15, 20 hours a week for a paycheck that is enough to cover all your expenses. Or people would be making $100,000, $150,000 a year in today's dollars for jobs that back in the 68 in today's dollars paid $30,000. But that's not how it worked out. John Maynard Keynes actually identified this. Back in the 1930s, he published a book called, or a paper, published or titled Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. And he predicted that, he said there's this economic problem. And the problem is, as productivity increases, the need for workers decreases. Right? We're producing more and more stuff with the same people. There's demand for more and more stuff, but, we don't need more people. So, as more and more stuff is being done by automation. So what do we do about that? That's the economic problem that Keynes identified. And the solution, of course, is have people work fewer hours for the same pay, for a good pay, the same annual salary. Or if they want to work more hours, have them make, massively more money. Now, like I said, that all got stolen from us, what Keynes predicted, what Time magazine predicted, stolen from us by the billionaire class as a result of Reagan's structurally changing things, his ending the enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act, his changing the executive compensation laws so they could be paid with stock options rather than paychecks. So they end up with a maximum 20% income tax rate and all the other bennies out of that. And and raising the threshold of allowable and deductible executive pay. So in this article that I'm sharing with you from the New York Times, this is hindsight tells us that Keynes's optimism was misplaced. Capital growth and productivity are already much greater than he predicted they would be by 2030. But we're not working for 15 hours a week. So then he segues to this story about the Bushmen of the Kalahari. He says the 15-hour week was a reality for some of the handful of remaining tribes of autonomous hunter-gatherers and that, in all probability, is the norm for much of the history of the modern human race, modern Homo sapiens. He said, where the economic problem holds that we have unlimited wants and needs, the hunter-gatherers, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, had few wants, and their few wants were easily met. So, they didn't have advertising telling them that if they didn't, put this cream on their face or something, that everybody would hate them. I mean, they knew what they needed. And they go on to say highly refined hunting technologies used by the modern Juhonsi hunters stretches back at least 45 and possibly as many as 90,000 years. So we as humans have been living this way for 90,000 years. And he writes, if the success of a civilization is judged primarily on its endurance over time, then the Juhonsi's ancestors, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, render those of the ancient Egyptians, the Mayans, or even the Victorians mere novelties. And if they're a good analog for how all of our ancestors lived, then this has implication for understanding our, quote, human nature, our natures, and how we respond to challenges like automation. And he said the evidence points to the Neolithic Revolution as the genesis of the economic problem. And this takes us to Daniel Quinn. Daniel Quinn writing in Ishmael that basically the place where we all started going south that led us right to destroying the planet and having 8 billion people and everything else, the place where we all went south was when we started doing intensive agriculture in parts of the world where there were periods of time where no food would grow, which would be, the north and south, outside north and south of the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. And therefore, during those times when no food is growing, whoever had the food and could lock it up had absolute power and control over the society. And that then led to hierarchy, which then led to patriarchy, which then led to the creation of religions that justified hierarchy and patriarchy, which led to where we are right now. But this is not natural, so Daniel Quinn would say, and the Bushmen of the Kalahari would say. This is not human nature. What is human nature is the way that Native Americans were living in North America, the way that Aboriginal people were living in Australia, the way that the Bushmen of the Kalahari are living, in ways that never would destroy the earth. I mean, just think about it. You say, we've got all this technology and we're wonderful and it's an incredible society and blah-de-blah-de-blah, but our lifespans are shrinking, frustration with life is increasing, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, suicide is unknown, cancers are exploding, heart disease, diabetes, all these things, and we're destroying our planet. I mean, we're facing the possibility literally of an extinction event that could remove the human species from existence. And you can draw a straight line from that all the way back to 10,000 years ago to the agricultural revolution. So if we're going to have the agricultural revolution, this is sort of just like if we're going to have capitalism, then let's at least do it in a way that doesn't produce these massive concentrations of wealth among the people who are the hoarders and massive poverty among everybody else. It's wrong. There are 400 people who have more wealth than half of the planet. It's wrong that there are 10 people in the United States who have more wealth than half of the United States. And it's not just wrong, it's destroying us. So anyhow, check it out. It's James Sussman, S-U-Z-M-A-N, the Bushmen, had that whole work-life thing figured out. The New York Times. We'll be right back.